Rachel had always been a creature of habit. Every morning at 7:15, she'd walk through the turnstile at Union Station, climb the stairs to Platform 3 and wait for the 7:22 train. She knew exactly where to stand so the doors would open right in front of her. Third car from the front. Window seat on the left side. Same spot every single day. It wasn't just about comfort. It was about control. After everything that had happened in the past few years, having one thing she could count on felt like a small victory. Her marriage had fallen apart when she was 30. The kind of ending that wasn't dramatic or explosive, just sad and quiet. They'd grown into different people, wanted different things, and one day they both admitted it wasn't working anymore. That was 2 years ago now. 2 years of learning how to be alone again. 2 years of building a life that didn't include anyone else's schedule or preferences or moods. She'd gotten good at it, actually. Maybe too good. Her friends kept telling her she needed to get back out there, download the apps, go to events, say yes more often. But Rachel had tried all that. The awkward coffee dates, the forced conversations, the disappointment when someone who seemed perfect on paper turned out to be completely wrong in person. After a while, she'd decided it was easier to just focus on herself. Her job as a graphic designer kept her busy. She had her small apartment that she'd decorated exactly how she wanted. She had her routines and she had her morning train ride. The thing about taking the same train every day is that you start to recognize people. The older man who always wore a suit and read the financial section. The young woman with headphones who mouthed the words to whatever she was listening to. The college student who somehow managed to sleep through his stop at least once a week. They were like background characters in her daily life. Present but not involved. Rachel preferred it that way. She'd bring her sketchbook and spend the 30-minute ride drawing. Sometimes she'd work on projects for her clients. Other times she'd just let her pencil wander across the page, creating patterns and shapes that didn't mean anything to anyone but her. It was peaceful, meditative almost. The seat beside her usually stayed empty. She'd learned the subtle art of looking unapproachable without being rude. A slight lean toward the window, her bag placed just so on the edge of the seat. A focused expression that said she was busy, lost in her own world. Most people got the message and moved on to other seats. She told herself it wasn't that she didn't like people. She just liked her space, her bubble of quiet in a noisy world. Was that so wrong? October came with that particular kind of autumn chill that makes you dig your favorite jacket out of the closet. Rachel loved this time of year. The way the light changed, the smell of coffee seeming richer somehow, the excuse to wrap your hands around a warm cup and watch the world go by. It was a Tuesday morning. Nothing special about it. The train was running on time. Her coffee was the perfect temperature. She'd found a seat without any trouble. Settling into her usual spot like she'd done 1,000 times before, she pulled out her sketchbook, flipped past the pages of half-finished drawings and found a blank page. But something felt different today. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. The train was the same. The people were the same. Yet there was this strange awareness creeping over her, like that feeling you get when you know something's about to change but you don't know what, or how, or when. She glanced at the empty seat beside her. Really looked at it, maybe for the first time in months. Just an empty seat, gray fabric slightly worn, nothing remarkable about it. But for some reason, she couldn't stop thinking about it. How long had she been protecting that space? How many people had she subtly discouraged from sitting there, and why? What was she so afraid of? Rachel shook her head, trying to clear these thoughts. This was ridiculous. It was just a seat. She was overthinking things again the way she always did. She focused back on her sketchbook, starting to draw the outline of a building she'd seen on her walk to the station. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That sense of standing on the edge of something, of waiting for something without knowing what. She'd felt this way before, actually. Years ago, on the morning she'd met her ex-husband. She'd been in a coffee shop, and he'd asked if he could share her table because everywhere else was full. She'd almost said no. She'd been planning to sit alone, reading her book, enjoying her Saturday morning. But something made her say yes instead. That single decision had changed everything. Led to 5 years of marriage, some really good times, and eventually a divorce that left her picking up pieces she didn't know how to put back together. Maybe that's why she'd become so protective of her space. Every small decision, every person you let in, has the potential to upend your entire life. It was safer to just keep things simple, predictable, controlled. The train rocked gently as it moved through a curve in the tracks. Rachel added details to her drawing, shading in windows, adding texture to the brick. Her hand moved automatically, muscle memory taking over while her mind wandered. She thought about her sister's wedding last month, how she'd caught the bouquet by accident, how everyone had cheered and made jokes about her being next. She'd laughed along, but inside she'd felt this twist of something uncomfortable. Not exactly sadness, more like resignation. Like she'd already decided that chapter of her life was over. She was only 32. When had she started thinking like someone who'd given up? The train slowed as it approached the next station. Rachel watched passengers shuffle toward the doors, saw new ones waiting to board. The usual morning crowd. Everyone lost in their own thoughts, their own routines, their own carefully constructed worlds. The doors opened. People filed off. New people filed on, and then the train started moving again, pulling away from the platform, heading toward the next stop. Toward downtown, where Rachel would get off and walk 3 blocks to her office and start another day that looked a lot like yesterday, and the day before that. She went back to her drawing, but her eyes kept drifting to that empty seat. Tomorrow would be Wednesday. The week would continue its march toward the weekend. The seasons would change. Time would keep moving forward whether she was ready or not. Rachel didn't know it yet, but this odd feeling, this strange awareness, was her instinct trying to tell her something. That sometimes life doesn't ask permission before it changes. Sometimes it just shows up and sits down beside you. But that was tomorrow's story. Today she was still sitting alone, protecting her space, keeping the world at a comfortable distance. Tomorrow morning everything would look the same. Same train, same seat, same routine, except for one small difference that would change absolutely everything. Wednesday morning started like any other. Rachel's alarm went off at 6:30. She hit snooze once like she always did, then dragged herself out of bed at 6:39. Shower, coffee. The same breakfast she'd eaten for the past 3 months. Toast with avocado and a sprinkle of red pepper flakes. Sometimes she wondered if she was turning into one of those people who ate the same thing every day out of some weird need for control, then decided she didn't care enough to change it. The walk to the station was crisp and cool. Fall was really settling in now, and she'd worn her favorite burgundy jacket, the one that made her feel put together even when she definitely wasn't. By the time she reached platform 3, she'd finished her coffee and was ready to slip into her morning routine. 7:22, right on time. The train pulled up. The doors opened in exactly the spot she'd predicted. 3rd car, window seat on the left. She was moving on autopilot now, the kind of automatic behavior that lets your mind wander while your body does what it's trained to do. She settled into her seat, pulled out her sketchbook, and was about to lose herself in drawing when she heard a voice. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Rachel looked up. A man stood in the aisle gesturing to the empty seat beside her. He was probably mid-30s, wearing jeans and a navy sweater, carrying a worn leather bag that looked like it had seen some miles. His hair was slightly messy in that way that seemed intentional but probably wasn't. For a second, she almost did her usual thing. The polite smile that isn't really a smile. The "oh well, I'm kinda spread out here" excuse. But something stopped her. Maybe it was that weird feeling from yesterday. Maybe she was just tired of being that person. "No, go ahead," she heard herself say. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and sat down. "Thanks. Train's more crowded than usual today." Rachel nodded and looked back at her sketchbook, hoping that would be the end of the conversation. She wasn't trying to be rude. She just wasn't in the habit of chatting with strangers anymore, especially not at 7 in the morning, but she was aware of him in a way that annoyed her. The faint smell of coffee from whatever he'd been drinking. The sound of a zipper as he opened his bag. The rustle of pages as he pulled out a book. She snuck a glance. It was a collection of short stories by an author she recognized. One of those books that sits on your shelf for years because you keep meaning to read it, but never quite get around to it. The train rocked forward and Rachel tried to focus on her drawing. She was working on a design for a client's new restaurant. Modern but warm, clean lines but inviting. It was harder to concentrate than usual, though. She kept being distracted by her seatmate. He was a quiet presence, not fidgety or intrusive. He just sat there reading his book, occasionally taking a sip from a reusable coffee cup. But still, she was conscious of him in a way that felt unfamiliar after so many mornings of sitting alone. The next morning, Thursday, he was there again. Same time, same seat. This time he nodded at her as he sat down, a small acknowledgement that they'd now shared space twice. Rachel nodded back and returned to her sketchbook. By Friday, it felt almost routine. He'd arrive a minute or two after the train started moving, having boarded at the stop after hers. He'd take the seat beside her without asking now, just a polite nod of greeting. Then he'd pull out his book and she'd pull out her sketchbook and they'd sit in companionable silence for the rest of the ride. Rachel found herself noticing little things about him. The way he dog-eared pages in his book instead of using a bookmark, how he'd smile at something he was reading. Just a slight upturn of his lips. The fact that his coffee cup had a sticker from a bookstore she loved but hadn't visited in years. She didn't know why she was noticing these things. It didn't matter what kind of coffee cup a stranger used or how he treated his books. These were just details, meaningless observations. Yet she found herself collecting them anyway, like her brain was filing away information without her permission. On Friday afternoon, her best friend Lauren called. They'd been doing their weekly catch-up call for years now, ever since Lauren had moved across the country for work. "Anything new with you?" Lauren asked after they'd covered the basics of work and weather and weekend plans. "Not really," Rachel said. "Same old routine. No exciting train adventures. No mysterious strangers." Rachel laughed, but something made her pause. "Actually, funny you should mention that. There's this guy who's been sitting next to me all week. Oh, tell me everything. Is he cute?" "Lauren, it's not like that. He just sits there. We don't even talk, but is he cute?" Rachel rolled her eyes even though Lauren couldn't see it. "I guess. I mean, objectively speaking. But that's not the point. The point is it's just been weird having someone in my space after so long. Weird good or weird bad? That was the question, wasn't it?" Rachel thought about it. "I don't know yet. Just weird. The weekend felt longer than usual." Rachel cleaned her apartment, tried a new recipe that didn't turn out quite right, and met a friend for brunch on Sunday. Normal weekend things. But she kept thinking about Monday morning, about whether he'd be there again or if the week had just been a coincidence. She told herself it didn't matter either way. It was just a seat on a train. He was just some person she'd probably never talked to beyond a polite nod. There was no reason to think about it this much. But Monday morning, she found herself checking her reflection in the mirror an extra time before leaving. Not getting dressed up or anything. Just making sure she looked decent. Put together. Then she felt ridiculous for even caring. 7:22. The train arrived. She got on, found her seat, and tried to look absorbed in her sketchbook. 2 stops later, he got on. But this time, something different happened. As he approached the seat, Rachel's pencil rolled off her lap. It happened in slow motion, the way things do when you're about to watch something hit the floor and there's nothing you can do about it. But he caught it. His hand shot out and grabbed it mid-air, smooth and natural, like he'd been expecting it. "Nice catch," Rachel said, surprised at herself for speaking first. He handed her the pencil, and their eyes met properly for the first time. His were brown, warm with tiny lines at the corners that suggested he smiled a lot. "Thanks," she added, taking the pencil back. "No problem." He sat down, pulling out his book, but before he opened it, he said, "I'm Ben, by the way. Figured if we're going to be seat neighbors, might as well know each other's names. Rachel, nice to meet you. Rachel." Then he opened his book and started reading, like that tiny exchange had been perfectly sufficient, not pushing for more conversation, not making it awkward, just acknowledging that they were 2 people sharing space. And now they had names. Rachel went back to her drawing, but she couldn't help smiling a little. Ben. It was a solid name, straightforward, unpretentious. She hadn't expected to learn his name. Hadn't planned on any of this becoming more than just a temporary disruption to her routine. But now he wasn't just the guy on the train. He was Ben. And somehow that changed things even if she couldn't quite explain how. The train rocked along its familiar path. Rachel drew her lines and shapes. Ben read his book. To anyone watching, they probably looked like 2 commuters who barely knew each other existed. But something had shifted. Something small but significant. A door had opened, just a crack, and Rachel had the unsettling feeling that she'd been the one to open it. The week after they exchanged names, something in Rachel shifted. She found herself looking forward to her morning commute in a way she hadn't in years. It wasn't anything dramatic, just this quiet anticipation of seeing Ben, of that small moment when he'd sit down and they'd exchange their brief morning greeting before settling into their respective activities. Tuesday morning. She got to the train and realized she'd forgotten her sketchbook. For a moment, she felt genuinely panicked. What was she supposed to do for 30 minutes without it? Just sit there, look at her phone like everyone else? The thought felt strangely uncomfortable. Ben got on at his usual stop. When he sat down, he noticed immediately. No drawing today? Rachel shook her head, feeling oddly embarrassed. Left my sketchbook at home. I never do that. Rough start to the day? Something like that. She paused, then added, What are you reading? It felt like a bold question. They'd been sitting next to each other for over a week, and this was the first time either of them had really tried to start a conversation beyond basic pleasantries. Ben held up the book so she could see the cover. Short stories. Been trying to read more fiction lately. I used to read all the time, but somehow got out of the habit. I know what you mean. I used to read constantly. Now I feel like I'm always too tired or too busy, even though I'm probably not actually busier than I was before. Exactly. He smiled. I think we just get in ruts. Forget what we used to enjoy. The conversation could have ended there. Both of them could have retreated back into their separate worlds. But Rachel surprised herself. So what made you start reading again? Ben was quiet for a moment, and Rachel worried she'd pushed too far. But then he said, My dad passed away a few months ago. I was going through his stuff and found all these books he'd collected over the years. Some of them had notes in the margins. His thoughts about certain passages. It made me realize how much I'd stopped paying attention to things like that. Just going through the motions, you know? I'm sorry about your dad, Rachel said softly. Thanks. It's been an adjustment. He was sick for a while, so it wasn't unexpected, but still, you're never really ready. Rachel understood that feeling more than he knew. Her own mother had died when she was 23, cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't give you enough time to say everything you need to say. My mom died when I was in my 20s, she found herself saying. And you're right. You're never ready, even when you think you are. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition. A understanding that they'd both been through something hard and come out the other side different than they went in. The train pulled into the next station, and more people crowded on. Someone's backpack bumped Rachel's shoulder. The moment passed, but something had been established. They weren't just seat neighbors anymore. They were two people who'd shared something real. Over the next few days, the conversations grew. Little by little, piece by piece. Ben told her he was an architect, that he'd moved to the city 3 months ago for a fresh start after his dad died. He'd been living in a smaller town upstate, working for his father's firm, and realized he needed to be somewhere new, somewhere without memories on every corner. Rachel told him about her divorce, surprised at how easily the words came. She'd gotten good at the short version, the version that made it sound mutual and mature and completely without pain. But with Ben, she found herself telling him the real version, how it had hurt more than she'd expected, how she'd felt like a failure even though she knew intellectually that some relationships just don't work out, how she'd spent the last 2 years building walls and calling it healing. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking time for yourself, Ben said one morning as they discussed it. Everyone acts like you have to immediately bounce back, get back out there, move on. But sometimes you need to just sit with things for a while. Exactly, Rachel said, feeling seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. Though at a certain point, sitting with it starts to look a lot like hiding from it. Ben laughed. Fair point. I'm probably guilty of that too. They discovered they had more in common than they'd expected. Both were only children. Both had complicated relationships with their remaining parent. Both loved architecture and design, though from different angles. Both had moved to the city hoping for something they couldn't quite name. I think I came here to disappear, Ben admitted one morning. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. I wanted to be somewhere no one knew me or my family or my history. Just start fresh. And how's that working out? Rachel asked, honestly. It's lonelier than I thought it would be. Turns out starting over from scratch is harder when you're not 22 anymore. Everyone already has their friend groups and routines. Sometimes I feel invisible, Rachel nodded. I know that feeling. I moved here 7 years ago and I still sometimes feel like I'm not quite part of the city, like I'm just passing through even though this is where I live. Does it get easier? I'll let you know when I figure that out. Friday came and Rachel realized with a jolt that she'd been looking forward to these morning conversations all week. That the 30-minute train ride had become the best part of her day. That she'd been thinking about things Ben had said, turning his words over in her mind during quiet moments at work. This should have worried her. She'd spent 2 years avoiding exactly this kind of connection. But instead she just felt grateful. Grateful that he'd sat down next to her. Grateful that she'd let him. As the train pulled into her stop, Rachel gathered her things. Ben would ride a few more stops to his office downtown. Have a good weekend, he said like he did every Friday. But this time, Rachel hesitated. Hey, do you ever grab coffee near here? There's a good place around the corner from the station. She couldn't believe she'd just said that. What was she doing? This was supposed to stay contained. Train conversations, nothing more. Ben looked surprised but pleased. Yeah, I'd like that. Monday morning. We could catch an earlier train and have time before work? Sounds good. Rachel got off the train in a daze. Had she just asked him out? No, not out, just coffee. Coffee was neutral. Coffee was just two friends who happened to take the same train. Except they weren't friends. Not really. They were something undefined, existing in this strange in-between space. She spent the weekend second-guessing herself. This was a mistake. She was going to ruin the one good thing about her mornings by trying to make it something more. Ben probably thought she was interested in him romantically. Was she? No, maybe. She didn't know. By Monday morning, she'd almost talked herself into canceling. She could just text him, except they'd never exchanged numbers. And not showing up felt even worse than showing up and having it be awkward. So she went. She got to the coffee shop at 7, 15 minutes before they'd agreed. Ben was already there, sitting at a table by the window with 2 cups in front of him. I didn't know what you liked, so I got you a cappuccino. Hope that's okay. If not, I'll drink it and you can order something else. Rachel sat down, touched by the gesture. Cappuccino's perfect. Thank you. And just like that, the awkwardness dissolved. They fell into conversation as easily as they did on the train. Maybe easier without the background noise and other passengers. They talked about their weekends, their jobs, their hopes for the week ahead. Nothing earth-shattering. Just the comfortable exchange of 2 people who were starting to know each other. An hour passed before Rachel looked at her watch and realized they needed to leave for work. We should do this again, Ben said as they walked back toward the station. Yeah, Rachel agreed. We should, and she meant it. Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, she wanted more of it. The realization didn't scare her as much as she thought it would. Maybe that was growth. Or maybe it was just Ben, making it easy to take these small steps forward. Either way, she was taking them. One morning, one conversation, 1 cup of coffee at a time. 6 weeks. That's how long it had been since Ben first sat down next to Rachel on the train. 6 weeks of morning conversations that had become the highlight of her days. 6 weeks of coffee meetups that somehow always stretched longer than they should. 6 weeks of texts that started as logistics and turned into actual conversations. Rachel hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She'd been so careful for 2 years, so deliberate about keeping people at a distance. But Ben had slipped past her defenses without even trying. He didn't push or pry. He just existed next to her, steady and present. Until one day she realized she'd started counting on him being there. And that terrified her. It was a Thursday morning in late November when Rachel fully understood what was happening to her. She was getting ready for work, going through her normal routine when she caught herself smiling at something Ben had texted the night before. Just a silly observation about a movie he was watching, nothing profound. But it made her smile, and that's when it hit her. She was falling for him. Maybe had already fallen. The thought made her physically stop moving. She stood in her bathroom, toothbrush in hand, staring at her own reflection like it might have answers. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd promised herself safety, protection, no more risking her heart on someone who might break it. But here she was, thinking about a man she'd known for barely more than a month, feeling things she'd sworn she wouldn't feel again. The worst part? She was pretty sure he felt it too. There were moments when their eyes would meet and the air between them would shift. Times when their hands would brush accidentally and neither would move away. Conversations that went deeper than friendly. into territory that felt dangerous and thrilling and completely terrifying, yet neither of them had said anything. Neither had acknowledged what was clearly happening. They were stuck in this strange limbo, both aware of the tension but neither willing to be the first to name it. That morning on the train, Rachel was quieter than usual. Ben noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked as they settled into their seats. "Just tired," she lied. "Didn't sleep well? Want to talk about it?" "Not really, but thanks." He nodded and pulled out his book, but she could feel him glancing at her occasionally, concerned. It made her feel guilty. She was being distant and she knew it, but she didn't know how else to handle the panic rising in her chest. At work, she was distracted. Her boss had to repeat a question twice in their meeting. She made a mistake on a design she'd done 100 times before. Finally, around 3 in the afternoon, Lauren called. "I'm having a crisis," Rachel said instead of hello. "Okay, tell me everything." And Rachel did. She told her about Ben, about the mornings and the coffee and the texts, about how easy it all felt and how that easiness scared her more than anything. "So you're falling for a great guy who seems to really like you back," Lauren summarized. "I'm not seeing the crisis here. The crisis is that I can't do this again. I can't put myself out there and risk getting hurt. Rachel, listen to yourself. You're not even giving it a chance. You're ending it before it's begun because you're scared of what might happen. You didn't see me after the divorce, Lauren. I was a mess. I can't go through that again. But what if you don't have to? What if this time it works out? What if Ben is exactly who he seems to be, and you're about to throw away something real because you're too afraid to try?" Rachel was quiet. She knew Lauren was right, but knowing it and feeling it were two different things. "What do I do?" she finally asked. "You talk to him. You tell him how you feel. You take the risk. What if he doesn't feel the same way? Then at least you'll know." "But Rachel, I've been listening to you talk about this guy for weeks. He feels the same way. I'd bet money on it." The conversation with Lauren should have helped. Instead, it made Rachel more anxious, because now she couldn't pretend she didn't know what she needed to do. She needed to talk to Ben, but how? What would she even say? The next morning, Friday, she almost texted him an excuse not to meet for coffee. But at the last minute, she didn't. She showed up trying to act normal, but everything felt forced and awkward. Ben could tell something was wrong. He kept trying to make conversation, but Rachel's responses were short and distracted. Finally, he set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "Rachel, what's going on? Did I do something wrong?" "No, God, no. You've been great. You are great. Then why does it feel like you're pulling away?" She wanted to tell him the truth. Wanted to say that she was falling for him and it scared her senseless. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, "I just think maybe we're spending too much time together. I don't want either of us to get the wrong idea." Ben's expression shifted. Something closed off in his face. "The wrong idea about what?" "About what this is. We're friends. That's all this is." The words felt like lies even as she said them, but they also felt safer than the truth. "Right," Ben said quietly. "Friends." Of course. They finished their coffee in uncomfortable silence. On the train, they sat next to each other like they always did, but miles apart. Ben read his book. Rachel pretended to work on her sketchbook. Neither spoke. That weekend was miserable. Rachel tried to convince herself she'd done the right thing. She'd protected herself, set boundaries, but all she felt was hollow and sad. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a text from Ben, but nothing came. Why would it? She'd made it clear where things stood. Lauren called Saturday afternoon. "How'd the talk go?" I panicked. "Told him we were just friends." Rachel, "No." I know, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't put myself out there like that. So what now?" "Now I guess we go back to being casual acquaintances on a train. Except that's not what happened." Monday morning, Ben was on the train as usual. But instead of sitting next to Rachel, he took a seat a few rows back. He nodded at her politely when their eyes met, but that was all. Rachel felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. This was what she'd asked for, wasn't it? Distance, boundaries, friendship. So why did it hurt so much? Tuesday was the same. Ben on the train, but not next to her. Wednesday, Thursday. By Friday, Rachel was a wreck. She'd lost not just the possibility of something more with Ben, but also the friendship they'd built, the morning conversation she'd come to depend on, the easy companionship that had made her commute something to look forward to. She'd pushed him away and he'd actually gone. That Friday night, Rachel sat in her apartment looking at her phone. She had Ben's number. She could text him. But what would she say? Sorry for being scared? Sorry for lying about what I feel? Sorry for ruining the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years? All of those felt both true and completely inadequate. Her phone buzzed. For a second, her heart leaped, thinking it might be Ben. But it was just Lauren checking in. Again. Rachel typed out a response. I really messed up this time. Lauren's reply came immediately. So fix it. Tell him the truth. What's the worst that can happen? Rachel laughed bitterly. The worst that could happen was that Ben had already moved on, that he'd decided she was too much work, too complicated, too damaged, that she'd waited too long and lost her chance. But maybe the actual worst thing was never trying at all. Never knowing if something real could have grown from those morning train rides and coffee dates and text conversations. She opened a new message to Ben, stared at the blank screen, started typing and deleted it, started again. Finally, she set the phone down without sending anything. She needed to do this in person. She needed to see his face when she told him the truth. She just hoped she wasn't already too late. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. December had settled over the city with that particular kind of bleakness that makes you want to stay in bed forever. But Rachel was up early, had been up since 5 actually. She'd barely slept all weekend, rehearsing what she was going to say to Ben. She got to the train station 15 minutes early, stood on platform 3 watching trains come and go. Her hands were shaking and not from the cold. This was it. She was going to tell him the truth. Whatever happened after that was out of her control. 7:22 came and went. The train arrived. Rachel got on, moved to her usual seat, waited. Ben's stop came next. The train slowed, stopped. The doors opened. Rachel held her breath watching the people board. An older woman. A teenager with headphones. A businessman talking on his phone, no Ben. The doors closed. The train started moving again. Rachel sat there stunned. He wasn't coming. In all the weeks they'd been riding together, he'd never missed the train. Never. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, pulled up their text thread. The last message was from Thursday, a brief exchange about the weather. Nothing since. She started typing. Are you okay? You weren't on the train. She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. What right did she have to check on him? She was the one who'd pushed him away, the one who'd lied about her feelings. If he'd decided to take a different train or drive to work or just avoid her entirely, she deserved that. The rest of the commute was a blur. Rachel sat in her seat, staring out the window, feeling the weight of what she'd lost. She'd been so scared of getting hurt that she'd hurt herself instead. And worse, she'd hurt Ben, someone who'd been nothing but kind to her, who'd made her laugh and feel seen and remember what it was like to connect with another person. Work was impossible. Rachel went through the motions, but her mind was elsewhere. At lunch, she did something impulsive. She looked up Ben's architecture firm online, found their address. It was only a few blocks from her office. Was this crazy? Probably. Was she going to do it anyway? Apparently. She left work early, telling her boss she wasn't feeling well, which was technically true. She felt sick with nerves and regret and desperate hope that it wasn't too late. The architecture firm was in a newer building with lots of glass and clean lines. Rachel stood outside for 10 minutes trying to gather her courage. What was she even doing? She couldn't just show up at his work. That was too much, too intense, too everything. She was about to turn around and leave when someone tapped her shoulder. It was Ben. Rachel, what are you doing here? He looked different. Tired, maybe. His hair was messier than usual, and there were shadows under his eyes. But it was him, and just seeing him made her heart ache. I was looking for you, she admitted. You weren't on the train this morning. I know. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you. Say to me? Ben glanced around at the busy sidewalk. Can we go somewhere? Talk properly? There was a small park around the corner, mostly empty on a cold December afternoon. They sat on a bench and for a moment neither spoke. Finally, Ben broke the silence. I missed the train on purpose. I've actually been taking an earlier one for the past week. I thought it would be easier, not seeing you every day. Rachel felt like she'd been punched. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I handled everything completely wrong and I— Let me finish, Ben said gently. It should have been easier. That's what I thought. But it wasn't, it was terrible. And I realized I'd been doing the same thing you were doing, protecting myself, playing it safe, telling myself it was better not to risk it. What changed? I was going through some of my dad's stuff last night. Found a letter he wrote me before he died. He knew I was scared of living my life, scared of making mistakes, scared of getting hurt. He told me that fear isn't living, that real life only happens when you're willing to take chances on things that matter. Ben turned to look at her fully. You matter, Rachel. These past few weeks with you have mattered more than anything else in my life right now, and I don't want to give that up because we're both scared. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. I pushed you away because I'm terrified. My marriage ended and it broke me in ways I didn't expect. I spent 2 years building walls and convincing myself I was fine alone. Then you sat down next to me and suddenly I wasn't fine with being alone anymore. That scared me more than anything. I get it. My last relationship ended badly too. She cheated on me, actually, right before my dad got sick. It was this whole mess and I swore I was done with relationships. Done putting myself out there. He paused. But then I met you, and all those promises I made to myself started to feel less important than the possibility of something real. So what do we do? Rachel asked. We're both scared. Both carrying damage from the past. How do we make this work? I don't know. Maybe we start with honesty. I'll tell you the truth. I have feelings for you. Real feelings. The kind that make me check my phone too often and smile at random memories and want to share everything with you. It's probably too soon and maybe too much, but there it is. That's the truth. Rachel's heart was pounding. This was it. The moment she could keep hiding or finally be brave. She thought about the past 2 years. All that careful protection, all that safety. Had it made her happy? Had it made her life better? No, it had just made her lonely. I have feelings for you too, she said, and saying it out loud felt like breaking through a wall. I think I started falling for you that first week, and it's only gotten stronger. That's why I panicked, because this feels big and important, and I didn't know if I was ready for big and important. And now I think maybe being ready is overrated. Maybe sometimes you just have to jump and figure it out as you go. Ben smiled, that full, genuine smile she'd missed so much over the past week. That's very unlike you. The Rachel I know has everything planned out. Maybe I'm changing. Maybe you're changing me. Is that okay? More than okay. They sat there in the cold December afternoon on a bench in a small park and talked. Really talked. About their fears and their pasts and what they hoped might be possible. They talked about taking it slow, about being honest when things got scary, about not running away when it got hard. I can't promise I won't get scared again, Rachel admitted. I've spent so long protecting myself. It's going to be hard to break that habit. And I can't promise I won't second-guess everything, Ben said. I'm really good at overthinking things. Comes with the architecture territory. So we're both disasters. Good to know. The best kind of disasters. As the sun started to set and the temperature dropped further, they finally stood to leave. Ben reached for Rachel's hand, tentative, asking permission. She took it, lacing her fingers through his. Can I take you to dinner? He asked. Actual dinner. Like a real date. I'd like that. They walked back toward the train station, hands linked, talking about where to go. Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just happiness, though she was happy. Not just hope, though she had that too. It was bigger than both of those things. It was possibility. The sense that her life wasn't finished and closed off, but open and full of potential she hadn't imagined. A month later, Rachel still took the morning train. But now Ben met her at her stop, and they rode together every day. The seat that had been empty for so long was permanently filled. They'd had their first real fight and worked through it. They'd met each other's friends and family. They'd said, I love you on a snowy January evening, both terrified and both meaning it completely. Rachel's company had gone through layoffs after all, but she'd survived them. And even if she hadn't, it would have been okay. Because she'd learned something crucial. The scariest risks, the ones that make your heart pound and your hands shake, are often the ones most worth taking. She thought about that empty seat sometimes. How she'd protected it for so long. How she'd used it as a buffer between herself and the world. But that empty space hadn't protected her at all. It had just kept her isolated. Ben had filled that seat, and in doing so had filled something in her life she hadn't realized was missing. Not because she needed someone to complete her. She'd been complete on her own. But because she'd needed someone to remind her that being complete on your own and sharing your life with someone aren't mutually exclusive. You can be whole and still want company. You can be independent and still need connection. On a Friday morning in March, as they rode the train together, Ben reached over and squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Rachel looked at him, at this person who'd become such an essential part of her daily life, and smiled. "I'm thinking about empty seats, and how sometimes the best things in life happen when we stop protecting them and let someone sit down." Ben laughed. "That's very philosophical for 7 in the morning. I'm a philosopher now." "Didn't you know?" "I did not." "What else don't I know about you?" "Guess you'll have to stick around and find out." "I plan to," he said, and Rachel believed him. More importantly, she wanted him to. The fear hadn't completely gone away. She still had moments of panic, times when she wanted to run and hide and protect herself. But now when those moments came, she had someone to talk to about them. Someone who understood, who was working through his own fears, who chose her every day the way she chose him. The train rocked along its familiar path. Same route, same stop, same morning commute she'd been taking for years. But everything had changed. Not because of the train or the city or even her job. Because of one person sitting in what used to be an empty seat. Because sometimes that's all it takes. One person, one moment, one choice to be brave. And suddenly your whole life looks different. Suddenly you remember what it means to hope for things, to want things, to let yourself imagine a future that includes someone else. Rachel had her sketchbook open, but she wasn't drawing. She was just sitting there, hand in Ben's, watching the city pass by the window, feeling grateful for every choice that had led to this moment. Every lonely morning train ride, every carefully protected empty seat, every wall she'd built that had eventually come down, all of it had been leading here. To this train, this morning, this person beside her, to a life that was finally, beautifully, unpredictably full.